Welcome to another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland, the podcast here at WFNY, joined for a third time in a row by another man with two first names, Gage Will. I think we're a step closer. I've now acknowledged it in the first 3 seconds of the podcast. We're one step closer, Gage, to having an official podcast called The Pod with two guys with two first names.
I think we might need to sharpen that title up a little bit.
It just flows right off the tongue. Oh, man. I don't know. Today's podcast, I have a feeling, is going to be a dichotomy of emotion because we've had so much stuff going on this week and none of it on the field, of course, with the season over. But against my grain, I'm going to start with the positive because we've had a lot of positive this week. And I want to start with Corey Kluber, of course, winning his second Cy Young. I'm going to throw it to you first because it was a fairly dominating outcome. All but two first-place votes. Sale was just an afterthought to most people. To me, it seems like Corey Kluber has been on this path since he won the Cy Young 3 years ago. It seems like the voters have been really kind of paying attention to him the following season. With a losing record, a pretty bad losing record, but still fantastic metrics. He finished 9th, of course, last year, and then winning it again this year. Was it a surprise, though, to you, Gage, that it was such a landslide?
Well, if you would have told me that in June, I would have laughed at you. But
we were ready to write him off in June, right? Like, he was so bad. I mean, bad's not the right word, but, before June 1st, holy cow.
I think I said something on Twitter at that point, like just give Sale the award now, because I didn't really see even anything Kluber could do down the stretch to come and get that award. But he was phenomenal from June 1st to the end of the regular season. And I want to point out, too, those two first-place votes for Sale came from CBS Chicago and the Boston Herald.
Oh, man. And you almost have to mention the first place vote for J-Ram Cam from Kansas City, which is just weird.
Yeah, we know it wasn't Minnesota. Maybe it's Paul Molitor.
But so Kluber, I mean, I guess if you're a sensible person and you've got Kluber in age 31, while he's looked good over the past two seasons, he came out of the gate struggling. Obviously, he had some issues with his back heading up to his resurgence starting June 1st. I mean, what is this guy's window? There's been, behind the scenes since I'd say mid-July, I think I've had some DM conversations with a few people online about, Kluber realistically having a shot at the Hall of Fame if he wins a second Cy Young. I mean, I'm not there yet, but, obviously when you win a second Cy Young, that enters the equation. And what are your thoughts, Gage? Like, what is his window? You do get a little concerned when you have a spectacular season like this, bookended by, some clear back issues, and you start to worry perhaps about longevity there. But is there a concern that he's going to be 32 at the beginning of next season? What are we looking at with Corey Kluber? I mean, do you think he has a big enough window here heading into his age 32 season to make a run for the Hall of Fame? And is it A, realistic, and B, is it going to perhaps take a change in outlook for voters to get him in, even if he does have, say, 2 or 3 more outstanding seasons?
I think another Cy Young and he's the lock. But realistically, he would need to put together a couple more 5-WAR style seasons. And I don't say WAR is a be-all, end-all metric here, but that just means that the peripheral figures are there too. So I would think that he has to have 2 more seasons, his last few, to really, really enter that conversation.
Well, but
what do you think? Are you on the same page there? Or are you?
Well, I mean, I'm curious about all this because, we hear teams, like the Mets, especially with Callaway, having this brand new outlook on how to use the rotation, this sort of forced hand that Joe Madden has used, and of course Terry Francona has used in the playoffs, thanks to injured starters. We've seen sort of this whole brand new outlook on how to utilize a bullpen and how to utilize a rotation. It seems to me that, people want peak pitchers, and to get peak pitchers, we're going to see less and less long starts. We're going to see less and less, perhaps, fixed definition of what a starter looks like. Using that kind of thinking, I wonder if maybe over the next 10 to 15 years we see a shift in innings used by a starter, in a downward, kind of a downward trend, except for maybe some elite guys. I don't know. I wonder if in 15 or 20 years, let's say Kluber doesn't make it, if we start looking at pitchers maybe in a whole new light. Because of course, rest in peace Roy Halladay, who just passed away. Here's a guy who had several seasons of elite. I think his final F-WAR number was somewhere, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was in this, I think it was in the mid to high 60s. And that's kind of your point there of start. And again, like you said, WAR is not the end all and be all, but you kind of look at the general location of where a lot of Hall of Fame pitchers are, and that's sort of where they end up, 60 or above. I mean, I don't know. I think I might be overshooting Halladay here. Was he that high? He had to be that high.
I'm not sure off the top of my head with Halladay. I was looking.
Yeah. But I just think at the end of the day, it's going to take, even if he has, you're right, that third Cy Young probably locks it, but I still don't know. I mean, you never know how old school, voters are going to, he was mid 60s. School voters are going to go. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take. If he has another seven F4 season, though, another season like he had this year, I think that, you look at his peak years and you start, thinking about it. Maybe not right out of the gate, but maybe one of those that, he hangs on for a while and then gets in that way.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think I'm going to throw this out there. I think 10 to 15 years from now, when Kluber's hitting the ballot, we'll say 10 to 15 years, there's going to be enough new age metrically minded folks there that are going to look at, unless he falls off a cliff, those FIP, fielding independent pitching, and his marks in those categories are second to none over the past few years.
Insane. They're insane. They're absolutely insane.
The ERA peripheral stats love Corey Kluber. And like I said, unless he really sees a sharp regression, those are still going to look really favorably with a decent amount of innings under his belt. So I think as long as he doesn't hit that sharp regression, he's on course. I'll say that, even though he was a late bloomer. Yeah,
well, and that's the key. I mean, he's his first year as an official starter, full-time starter, wasn't until 2012 with the Indians, and he doesn't even make the club going into 2013. I think it took an injury for him to get in there at the beginning of the year. But I don't know. It's going to be a fun watch. I think having a player like Kluber figure it out, and I can't talk about how that happened enough, because he literally turned on a dime with that famous Mickey Callaway, Ruben Niebla meeting where they shifted his focus from that four-seamer to the two-seamer. And of course, Corey Kluber being the savant of pitching. It's been fun to watch. So the next couple of seasons are going to be good. I know Mike and I on this very podcast have, I guess, been on the other side of the coin with Kluber, saying, he's going to be really good, but I don't think we're going to see another one of those super elite seasons. Well, so much for that. The guy finished top 3 last year and cut his xFIP down an entire run, and his FIP down, 0.7. So unbelievable year by Corey Kluber. So congratulations to him. Let's shift over to Jose Ramirez, who finished 3rd in MVP voting. And I don't want to bitch about this because he finished 3rd, and I don't think anyone ever thought that would happen. But, should Aaron Judge – I hate to be petty. If Aaron Judge hit – if he plays for the Marlins, I know Stanton won. But, if he plays for some random team, is he finishing second? I guess – what am I being petty for? But come on. He didn't have a better – he hits home run. Come on. Sorry. It's just going to start me down this –
crazy too, Jim. And it's just hard for me to go against giving him the leg up. I mean, he was worth what, over 8 F4? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. As much as I dislike the Yankees and everything that comes from the Bronx, especially after they knocked the Indians out, it's hard to argue against putting that guy who had weighted runs created plus of in excess of 170 in that conversation. He walked and hit homers all year.
Let's not talk about him anymore. It makes me mad.
Well, all year until the playoffs when he struck out endlessly.
It makes me so mad. But congratulations to Jose Ramirez. Now, the interesting thing here with Jose Ramirez is that fantastic deal that he signed. Of course, we have Lindor finishing 5th, and then Corey Kluber finishes 7th. 3 Indians in the top 7 there. I mean, sky's the limit for these two. And I'm coming back to this Francisco Lindor deal. We did say last week we would talk a little bit about perhaps the Indians going forward with extending contracts. Lindor finishing 5th, and he had a very interesting season, I think, especially you look at the power and you look at some little quirks, maybe some swing changes and some just sort of philosophical changes regarding Lindor. But you got to think that, especially with the Santana stuff, Santana likely, he doesn't sign the qualifying offer today, and which we knew was going to happen. I mean, are the Indians going all full forward on trying to sign like even Lindor, even if it's a big contract? Do you think they go all in on trying to sign Lindor, who finished 5th this year? He's obviously going to be in contention for an MVP going down the road. Is it possible that the reason why they were hesitant on signing Carlos Santana to a big deal, is it possible that the reasoning behind that was something we didn't talk about at all last week? Is it because perhaps they're going all in on Lindor and we might see some sort of franchise record with Lindor on a long-term extension?
I would like to think that, but I'm not going full pessimist here. But it felt like the window to do that was last season. And if Lindor would have had a great defensive season with just his normal hitting clip this past season, I feel like an extension would be a bit more of a possibility, but the power display just kind of leaves me on the wrong side of the ledger with Lindor here, because he's locked up through what, 2021, Jim?
Yeah. Well, do you buy? I mean, so let's get this out of the way. Do you buy the 7-year, $100 million deal that was rumored that they offered him last year? Do you think that's a real thing?
Oh, I buy that. I would try and sign him for 7 years, $100 million.
Well, so if he turned that down, what are we looking at? 10-2?
I think we're getting up past $150 million into the $200 million range, which is, you talk about how long ago Alex Rodriguez signed that 10-year, $250 million contract, and now that was huge at the time. Now we're at a point with contracts where we're talking about the Indians considering something in the $200 million range. It feels far-fetched, but they also can't let him leave. He's the face of the franchise.
Well, but let's look at, I mean, so if you look at the numbers this year, power numbers included, and you look at Lindor and you look at this fantastic deal they got. I mean, you want to talk about timing it right. They signed Jose Ramirez to an extremely club-friendly deal, especially now. Can they even justify spending 10 and 200 mil on a guy like Lindor when this is a club? And it seems to me that perhaps all of us are falling into this trap of the Indians making a big splash last year and thinking that it's perhaps a ramp up, when in reality, perhaps much like, and I hate to compare it to this, but much like the season in which we signed Nick Swisher and Michael Bourne, it wasn't really a ramp up. It was, we have the money now, let's spend it. This is going to be our move for the next 2 or 3 years. Did we see that last year with the Encarnacion signing? They tried to sign Lindor. They signed Jose Ramirez to a team-friendly long-term deal. They already have the pitching wrapped up. Do we see the Indians looking at perhaps their window as having these little windows every 2 or 3 years of signing 1 or 2 guys to a big deal, and then long-term signing our affordable guys? Is that kind of what we're looking at? Or are we really looking at a potential ramp up where we maybe don't sign Santana, but we do go in for a Logan Morrison, or we go in for somebody else to a deal that we wanted to sign Carlos Santana to, and then maybe sign some more guys long term. I mean, I don't really get where they're going, but I do have this kind of gut feeling that even though they have more money because of the playoff runs, because of the sales of tickets, I kind of get this feeling that maybe that Encarnacion deal was the exception, not the rule.
I think I really bought the extended revenue from the World Series run last year and the new investor from wherever he was from. I know Kansas City, was it?
Yeah.
And don't they have a new TV deal as well?
Yep. Yep.
So
yeah, there's
I really
a lot.
bought
There's a lot of
those as factors as in ramping up. So this doesn't feel like Swisher born to me. And they didn't have the World Series run this past season, but you got to think that, I don't know the exact figures, but their season ticket holder base grew enough to maybe mask not having that World Series run.
Yeah.
I mean,
of course,
2016 to 2017.
Well, of course, they were over 2 million this year for the first time. I mean, since the the 90s, 2000, early 2000 teams. So they do seem to have more revenue. But again, I mean, we're talking about a team that's sitting somewhere in the ballpark of 125 to 130 million, especially when you consider arbitration increases. I mean, what are we talking? Are we saying that they can afford to have a $150 million payroll?
Isn't that what they closed the season at this year?
Yeah.
Were they 140, 145?
Well, yeah, but I mean,
more.
I mean, but that's I mean, we're including there, of course, like a Jay Bruce deal. We're including, so the little things here and there. I mean, I think when you take into account a starting season, at 130 million, I think you automatically know there's going to be those little things that happen throughout a year that increase. But I mean, we're almost saying that, if we start off at 150, I mean, where do we end?
160. I mean, they don't take on any. Yeah.
I don't know. These numbers seem so ludicrous to me because we're not used to them. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see, especially with arbitration. But, it's possible that we're looking at maybe extensions for, Trevor Bauer, maybe an extension for, Lindor. I mean, there's 2 or 3 or 4 guys, really they got to start thinking bullpen, maybe Cody Allen, Andrew Miller. I mean, are they still able to perhaps sign a Jay Bruce or sign a Carlos Santana and still be players for these extensions?
Yeah, I remember seeing something on Twitter from I think it was Kevin Kleps saying that they had about 20 million in wiggle room in free agency this season to get back to where they would be expected to be. But that's not including, like you said, the payroll bump that you expect during the season. I really think they would have to get creative and move a contract or two around, like a Yan Gomes or a Jason Kipnis, but that's a whole different – because they're paying those guys, 23, 24 million this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 13 and a half for Kipnis. And I don't know where Gomes is right now. He's not at 10, is he? I think he's a little under that, but yeah, somewhere in that ballpark at 22, 23 mil that they could clear off the deck.
So I think that's where your real flexibility comes from. And I also don't think it's a hard cap on the payroll. I mean, I know we've talked about it in that sense with Michael Brantley. I still stick to the 12 million is 12 million wherever you can use it. But I also think if an opportunity presents itself like Encarnacion last year, I don't think they planned to spend that extra 20 million. I think that was how the market dictated it and pushed it through to the Dolans who signed off on it. I think they start with a number and said they feel like they can get value on a guy. The Dolans trust Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff in making that move.
Well, and I do think, and I think we're going to get into this in a second, I do think that Terry Francona carries weight, in that regard, that I get this impression that if there's a guy that Terry Francona wants, and if Antonetti and Chernoff are signing off on it too, I think something, of course, can get done. And of course, I think if they looked at Encarnacion as a 2017, 2018 kind of thing, knowing that Santana was coming off the books, with that 12 million coming off the books next year, with Brantley perhaps moving on, I think that perhaps there's another big move to be made this year. I'm just curious to see what they do with some of these arbitration players. Do they try to cost control them a little bit by signing them long term, and will they do it? Because you think about a guy like Cody Allen. To me, he's just as hard to sign as Francisco Lindor. I know that relief pitching market fluctuates quite a bit, but to me, Cody Allen as a free agent, even with Andrew Miller out there as well, I mean, he's got to be looking at a big deal next year, right? So I mean, to sign him long term, you've got to be looking at $15 million a year, right? I mean, arbitration
15,
right now,
18.
yeah. So I mean, I think the reality is assigning him long term. The reality is assigning Andrew Miller long term. It's funny. I think you could have an interesting debate on who makes more next year, Andrew Miller or Cody Allen, because this is, you're just looking at pure age. I think Cody Allen, just in that regard, might entice somebody to a big deal. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, because this could bump Salazar into the bullpen just by need. To be honest, I mean, not to mention the arm, but just by need. Anyways, going way off the beaten path here.
I want to say
Ram,
Cody Allen gets 5 for 90 next year in free agency.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that's what the Indians.
No, not from the Indians. I'm saying he's going to get 5 for 90 from someone. That's the going rate for it.
Yeah, and but next year's free agent market is insane. We could see guys thinking they're going to get a lot that don't, just because so much is at the top of that. But we'll have to wait for that for another year. We'll see. All right, let's talk. I do want to talk about one other piece with J-Ram. I think that even guys like me who've been high on the guy for 5 or 6 years now, I think, this MVP run was way off the beaten path. Even though last year we saw, kind of the beginning of all this, what kind of window are we going to see? I mean, Ramirez's numbers this year, especially when you look at his power. I mean, this is a guy that almost hit 30 home runs. This guy had scored 100 runs. He almost had a 7-WAR season. I mean, are we looking at his ceiling, or is there more upside there?
I threw it out there on Twitter today. Who would you rather have for 2018, Francisco Lindor or Jose Ramirez? And the responses varied a little bit, but I came to the conclusion that Francisco Lindor might have a higher ceiling, but Jose Ramirez has a higher floor. I feel like he's established himself in that 5.5, 6 WAR range, and I don't really see that falling down just because of how well he covers the plate, how well he plays defense, how well he finds the gaps. I was afraid of a little drop-off this year, and after 2017, there's nothing that could convince me that that's not who Jose Ramirez is.
Just an incredible value. Just an incredible value.
Yeah,
just insane. The Indians, Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff can pat themselves on the back for that deal, because even if he does regress a little bit, if his window now is, that 4.7 he had last year, or that 6.6 that he had this year. If we're looking at a guy who's going to be bouncing between that for the next 6 or 7 years, oh my God. The guy is, he's 20, we're talking about a 25-year-old guy here. What a crazy get for them. Just based on value alone, I think you have to pick Jose Ramirez, because like we both know, Francisco Lindor is going to be making a ton of money. Now, again, Lindor's cost effective, for the next 4 seasons, but oh boy, Jose Ramirez, man, what a year for him.
Jose gets what, $6.5 million this year? Is that what his deal is?
Yep. That's exactly what his deal is.
That's under the price of 1 WAR on the free agent market.
Well, his official deal is what, 5 and 26, and then 2 options on that. I think that take it up in the upper 40s. But wow, the fact that we have 2 club options at the tail end is even better. So we still have 4 years of that deal left. It's incredible. It's insane.
And just imagine the value he has I think it's kind of underappreciated, actually, how great that contract is. It's a top contract in baseball.
I think. I mean,
Corey Kluber and Jose Ramirez have two of the top contracts in baseball.
Yeah, throw Carrasco in there as well.
That's what allows $140 million.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, which is almost embarrassing in and of itself, especially with Corey Kluber. And well, here's the thing with Kluber too that we really should probably do another podcast on. These Cy Young runs really have upped his contract quite a bit more than what they signed him for. So you got to give props to Corey Kluber. I love these players that put incentives in their contracts, and you look at them and go, "That's never happened." I remember looking at I think it was a Mark Whiten contract from way back in the day. I don't even know if it was with the Indians, but he had like MVP clauses in there, and I'm thinking, my gosh, like his agent should be fired on the spot. That's ridiculous. But here's a guy like Corey Kluber who. Yeah,
that better like triple his contract.
I know. And a guy like Corey Kluber has really bumped that contract up. So you got to have props to Corey Kluber. I mean, just what a fantastic year. Props to Jose Ramirez. But now let's get into the real fun of this podcast. I think the whole point of this podcast was to get to this point. Today, Joe Gerberry wrote a piece called TitoBOYZZ, and I don't know that in our circle it's anything that we haven't already talked about. I know, Gage, you and I have talked about this. I know we've talked about it with Mike Hattery. I know, just Mike Bodie as well. And I know this is the precarious position of having a manager who literally is a top 3 manager in baseball, who has this insane high rate of making gut calls at work. The flip side of that, I think, we even saw it a little bit at the tail end of his career in Boston, is when your gut calls stop working or fall flat. And clearly we saw that to some extent this year as we got into the playoffs. And that now we're seeing some very suspicious looking moves that, on one hand, you can be excessively naive and say, oh, well, Michael Brantley's going to be fine and the injuries aren't related. Or, they still have a chance to sign Carlos Santana because no other team of the 11, 12, or 13 that are knocking on his door are going to offer him $100 million. Or, putting a guy who's never played at first base is going to be okay. So looking at Joe's piece today, I mean, there's a whole lot of places we can start there. I guess, where do we start, Gage? I should just let you have the pod now.
I want to say that Terry Francona may be a top 3 or 5 manager in baseball, but it has nothing to do with his gut calls. I know what happened last year in the playoffs, that it worked out. The gut calls worked out. But I want to hearken to something that Mike Hattery talks about all the time: process over results. More important than results, because results will come more frequently if you use the correct process. And the gut calls, I'm getting off a little bit here, but the gut calls aren't what make him good. It's his way that he handles the clubhouse, handles the players. It doesn't mean that you can think he's a good manager. And he makes a lot of mistakes with these gut calls. And I think he backed into using Andrew Miller last year that way in the playoffs, in a sense, just because there was no other option. He had 3 starters if you don't want to count Bowers Pinky. So my biggest point to drive home here is gut calls are not why Tito is good. Tito is good because of his clubhouse. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting on the porch last year talking with Adam Burke and Mike about this very thing. And we did have this incredulous conversation about how many times Tito will kind of pull something out of the hat and we'll rip it to shreds and it'll work. And of course it gives these semi-pro thinking lunkheads, we'll see, look, Josh Tomlin in the playoffs, was the dominating pitcher. And I don't know why I'm turning into Jimmy Stewart here, but I I think that, when you look at some of these moves, and I think a case in point, Joe Gerberry's first point was a point that has driven me insane since it happened. And that's putting Michael Brantley and Lonnie Chisenhall on the playoff roster because, well, they deserved it. And Michael Brantley had that great 11 pitch at bat. Like, give me a break. I went off on this last week, and I cannot believe that people are not going insane about this. Lonnie Chisenhall and Michael Brantley were two black holes in the roster. You lose Edwin Encarnacion, and you've got to plan for these things. These are things you have to plan for. You have to figure playoffs are weird. You might have Jose Ramirez struggling and Francisco Lindor struggling, and heaven forbid somebody gets hurt. Thank God, you had a guy like Kipnis in center field, but, let's start there. Like, that's a gut call. You make a gut call on Lonnie Chisenhall and Michael Brantley because they didn't do anything in September. Brantley didn't even play. And Chisenhall started to play, got hurt again, came back, looked like garbage, and makes the roster. And let's face it, bad gut call, right? So let's just start there. What are your thoughts on that? Because, how is that not a big deal? Are we really that okay with Michael Brantley that he can suck? Just suck. Halfway cost us a loss. And us just be okay with it. Trust in Tito, right?
Yeah, always.
God.
It might be part of what makes him so good in the clubhouse is that blind loyalty. And it is blind loyalty. It's not that Michael Brantley isn't good. It's not that Lonnie Chisenhall didn't have a good season. It's that they weren't ready to play. And I saw somebody throw it out there. Well, how do you face the clubhouse and tell Michael Brantley he isn't playing? How's that going to look with the other players? Oh. I call bogus there. You tell the other players he's not healthy enough to play. They want to win. They understand. Yandy Diaz can swing a bat. I know.
Hold on.
86 weighted runs crazy.
Hold on. See, yeah. This is where this really gets under my skin because and again, you want to talk about a clubhouse, a professional guy in the clubhouse like Terry Francona. This shouldn't be an issue. None of what you're saying should be an issue at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't Michael Brantley considered one of the quote unquote captains of the team? So correct me if I'm wrong. Shouldn't he at least have some semblance of reality to understand that if Terry Francona says you're not playing, shouldn't Michael Brantley be big enough as the quote-unquote captain of the freaking team to say, hey, guys, I'm probably not quite there yet. Get us to the ALCS. Or it could be, because here's my thing. If you're really a clubhouse manager, that shouldn't be a freaking issue. Sorry.
Well, He
280 words on Twitter isn't enough, my friend. 280 words isn't even close. It's ridiculous. Trust in Tito, my ass.
Trust in Tito to roster Jason Giambi for all of the 2013 season. Oh, but he had the big walk-off home run off of Addison Reed. Trust in Tito to roster Mike Aviles because he had big calves and his...
Well, we could go down a path there, and we could get ourselves in really because I'm already down the path.
We're already down the path, but I just want to make a point that there is a line there. There is a line between loyalty and productivity, and Michael Brantley should have pointed that out. Michael Brantley was probably a little eager, and who could blame him, to play after what happened in 2016. Maybe he ignored some of his own issues because he's never done that before. He's never ignored, hey, my shoulder hurts. He's never ignored, hey, my ankle hurts. Nah, sorry, man. It's a light high sprain, and he'll be out for a few days. Jeez. I guess, I'm a big believer in the locker room, and I think our locker room is pretty spectacular. I know I go a little bit overboard on this stuff, but a guy like Brantley, to me, you hear rumors that he didn't want to play first base last year, which is why they went and got Encarnacion. Well, good for them. But now you've got him, again, we talked about this last week, but this Brantley thing and these Tito boys, which I can't get out of my head. It makes me laugh every time I think about it.
what's it take to get to that point? I mean, what does it seriously take? Because, if you go back in time, Jose Ramirez was one of those guys almost straight out of the gate. Here's a guy who they bring him up August 31st, 2013 to make sure he makes the playoff roster. They gave him shortstop before Lindor. They sent him down, brought him right back up. So he's clearly on the good side here. But Yandy Diaz is a prime example. He seemed to be on that side in September. They played him quite a bit at third base. He looked spectacular. We talked about this last week. I mean, what do you have to do to become one of – because – and look, Zimmer's there, right? So what do you have to do to be one of those guys? Hey, what about Naquin? He was a Tito boy last year. I honestly think if you would have put him in a lineup, do you think maybe Francona might have thought Zimmer was Naquin until he made one of those catches? I'm sorry. Now I'm making him sound senile, but I'm a fan. All right, go ahead. There is a middle ground. Go ahead.
There is a middle ground here. I'm not sitting here ripping Tito to shreds. I think there are a lot of things he does that are good, and I think there are a lot of things that he does that are bad. I think there is a middle ground to be had. I don't think that middle ground is sitting here tweeting about how oblivious you are to the issues and how you should blindly trust in Tito and he's always going to make the right move. That is not the middle ground. The middle ground is questioning decisions because you don't understand them. And that's where I'm at with Tito. I don't understand rostering Michael Brantley and Lonnie Chisenhall. I don't understand Carl Willis replacing Mickey Callaway. Nothing against Carl Willis.
I have plenty. I have plenty against Carl Willis, but that's for another day.
But to my overall point, there is a middle ground, and it's not where the trust in Tito faithful thinks it is. That's all I'm going to say here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like anything else. It's evidence-based, and when you start to look at some of the moves and you start to look at some of the strategies that you see game in and game out, that are questionable. You are allowed to question that because, hey, guess what? We're fans, and that's what fans do. There are people who sit back and think, I'm smarter than you because Tito Francona won 2 World Series with Boston, and he did. And, the Indians have been fantastic regular season team. They almost won the World Series last year. Terry Francona is the manager. It's not like I can sit back here and say, well, they would have been better if they would have had insert name, because we don't know that. I mean, there's no fact-based evidence there. What I don't want to happen, and I mean, if he gut calls a playoffs and they win a World Series, you won't hear me say a word. But what I don't want to happen is what happened in the 90s when I thought 1995 this was a lock team to win a World Series. You look at a window that this Indians team has, and you think to yourself with Corey Kluber, with Carlos Carrasco, entering their 30s years, perhaps with this rotation, maybe they can keep it going. Obviously, they've done some things to do that. But what I don't want to have happen is us to be sitting here 4 or 5 years from now thinking, well, we had our chance, we screwed up our chance, and now let's look back and criticize some of the moves that Tito Francona has made. I just think the reality here is, when you see a team like Houston, who seems built to win for a long time, you see a team like New York, who should not have beat us this year, but now has that playoff experience. It's really super important as you develop as a team. And you see that the Yankees, as you mentioned last week, has a whole bunch of money coming off the books with a whole bunch of fantastic players on that market, and the Yankees just ready to be the Yankees. You start to think, while our window to be a good team is there, are we going to be the best team and have the best chance? Playoff baseball is a wild card. I understand that. We'll get the Indians there and the rotation will take care of itself. But that goes both ways, and we saw that happen this year. It went the other way. So I just don't want to sit here 5 years from now thinking, damn, there goes another window down the drain. How long is it going to be to the next one? And that's what I keep thinking in my head, that if we keep getting to the playoffs with some questionable moves being made heading into it, and who can, I mean, it's not like the Brantley move was a surprise, but it's not like, I mean, they had options. And I'm just worried that it takes too much to be the right option in Terry Francona's clubhouse. That being said, it's hard to argue the flip side of this. It's hard to argue that he's not the best manager of our lifetimes. I mean, you could argue it, but results are results, and he has gotten results. So, what is the balancing line here? Gage, without me rambling for 10 more minutes, because I haven't even talked about the coaching changes. I haven't even talked about this option getting picked up, although I went off on that last week. What's the balancing line heading into next year? I think a lot of us maybe looked at Callaway and looked at this front office as being kind of the counterbalance to, Terry Francona, that, if he makes any questionable moves, you had sort of somebody there that maybe counterbalances it. With Carl Willis in there now and, Scott Atchison there in the bullpen. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is he – what exactly is the power structure in this organization? I mean, is there hope that, this very metrics-oriented front office can maybe roster this team so they can keep him from doing things like this? I mean, is there hope, or are we just going to have to sit back and pray that we stay healthy so that these dumb moves can't be made?
That's my biggest worry, is not Francona's game management decisions in 2018. They drive me crazy, but they might drive me crazy batting J-Ram 5th or 6th or something, or bunting with Francisco Lindor. Those little things will peeve me during the season, but my biggest concern is that Francona has the reins on the organization, and he's going to make all these gut hires and gut calls on retaining players that your best bet at winning the World Series is with the playoffs the way that they are, is maximizing your window to win division titles. The Indians are set up to control the Central Division over the next few years if they make the right ancillary moves. And this offseason has just been a slap in the face with, and I don't know how Carl Willis and Scott Atchison is very respected, a very respected baseball mind. So I don't know how these are going to pan out. I just don't like the feel, and it feels like Terry Francona is driving the bus.
Can we talk about Carlos Carrasco in the playoffs? The guy who finished top 5 in the Cy Young. Can we talk about him for a second? Because I can't. I think when you look back in hindsight at what happened in the playoffs, I took a lot of heat for bitching about the rotation order. Some of it because of the Kluber placement, a lot of it because of the Carrasco placement. I mean, these are the kind of calls that concern me, when you almost outthink yourself. Is this what happens? Does Francona sometimes outthink himself? Because wouldn't it make sense to you to put guys like Carrasco and Kluber in a position to get as many starts as they can? And Kluber did get as many starts as he could, but Carrasco certainly didn't. I mean, did they really shoot himself? Is this the – I mean, I don't know. I think we could go down a whole lot of different rabbit holes here, and we got to wrap things up here pretty soon. But, I mean, like that Carrasco move in and of itself seems pretty big to me.
Trevor Bauer had a great season. Did he deserve to start twice in a playoff series? Maybe, but not with the Indians. Not with Corey Kluber and Carlos Carrasco. And what really isn't talked about enough is the decision to save Kluber for Game 2 might have cost them in Game 5, because you didn't have the flexibility of who are you going to pitch. Bauer pitched on short rest in Game 4. Carrasco had just pitched Game 3. He wasn't going on 2 days rest in Game 5. So if Kluber did have an aching back in between those starts, the decision to structure the rotation like Francona did shot the team in the foot in that Game 5, because they had no one else to start. Clevenger and Salazar were both in the bullpen. I I guess you could have went with a playoff game. So I really think that he outsmarted himself or overthought that whole structure because Corey Kluber wanted to pitch on appropriate rest, or because, and I know Bauer has said he likes going on short days on 3 days rest, but Bauer says a lot of stuff, and the numbers are there about pitchers on 3 days rest. It seems like it was so easy just to pitch Kluber, Carrasco, Bauer, Kluber, Carrasco.
I mean, yeah. I mean, and this isn't hindsight, by the way. I think both of us were talking about this pretty extensively while it was going on. I just, and again, the difference in outcome between 2016 and 2017 is obvious. I was whining and moaning in 2016 too, and everything worked out. I think that, you always want to maximize playoffs. And I think the one thing we always have said from the start is get us to the playoffs and let our rotation take care of it. And then we get to the playoffs and the two guys that are our number one and number two don't get put in optimal positions, especially Carrasco. You can point to the Kluber dancing around all you want, but you had Carrasco sitting there and got one start. And however good it was or however bad it was, you still take your chances with 2 Carrasco starts instead of 1. And I know 3 days rest sucks, but I kind of thought they had positioned their rotation to be defensible for that regardless. But apparently not. Apparently you only trust.
That one Carrasco start might have been the best Indians start in the playoffs in the last 2 years.
Right. Well, there you go. So I know, but hindsight though, right?
Bauer in game 1 was phenomenal too. Hindsight's 2020. I mean, it's not really hindsight because we talked about these when they happened.
Yeah.
Or when the moves were. Yeah.
So what is the one? I mean, I guess we're sitting in the middle of this off season and we still don't know where things are going to go yet. Let's just run through a couple of scenarios here. We talked about this last week. Now that it's official, and kind of hurts a little bit to say this, but Carlos Santana is officially able to talk to other teams now. I mean, is there a chance he comes back? I mean, if you believe the numbers, and if his agent is as good as I think he might be, especially playing all these numbers out there in the public like he is, I think is it possible Santana gets a bigger deal than Encarnacion?
I also think that the beginning of free agency, there's a lot of interest and everybody's calling about him. So I don't want to get too carried away with it. I'll say I still expect him to sign a very similar deal to Encarnacion.
Yeah, and I still think Hosmer's the key. As much as I love the fact that Fangraphs put Carlos Santana ahead of Hosmer, I still think in my gut that people wait on Santana until Hosmer signs a deal, just based on the fact that Hosmer 27. I just think he signs the first deal, and I think they play off of that. All right, so I guess the next thing to talk about then is Kipnis, and I really wanted to get into this last week, and we didn't really. I just don't. I mean, you talk about taking money off the books, and let me just throw this by you, and we'll kind of end with this. Are you at all concerned about a substantial shift in the locker room? Let's say that Santana does sign somewhere else. Is it smart to you? And I know both of us look at metrics and a lot of times metrics first, but do you think it's smart to you to lose Callaway, Beret, Santana, potentially Kipnis in a trade, and Yan Gomes in a trade? Does that seem like a smart move to you, especially thinking clubhouse?
I kind of view the clubhouse with a shifted core. I don't view Yan Gomes, and maybe this is a little off base, but if I think of that clubhouse, I'm thinking of Francisco Lindor and Jose Ramirez and Corey Kluber. I think that the days of Jason Kipnis and Michael Brantley and Jan Gomes being the center of that clubhouse are gone. And I worry more about Callaway and Beret, that shift. Trevor Bauer interacting with Carl Willis. I worry about how Scott Atchison will do with Cody Allen and Andrew Miller. But I guess I would say I'm really not that worried about that, Jim. I think the talent is there and talent wins. But you might differ from me a little bit in that regard.
Well, I've always been a big believer in catcher relationships, and I know, especially in our circles, that the Roberto Perez movement is a real deal, and it's a legit thing. I mean, as funny as it sounds for me to say this, I met Roberto Perez when he was playing at Kinston, and my first comment after I watched him catch the both ends of a doubleheader, and one of the games went 18 innings. I mean, this is a guy who does not quit, and defensively is absolutely fantastic. And I remember saying, I wrote a piece for Indians Baseball Insider back then saying that Roberto Perez eventually was going to be a major league starter. And I got crushed, mainly because nobody knew who the hell Roberto Perez was. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, because of course a lot happened in between that day and now, but I am a huge Roberto Perez fan, having met him and talked to him and hung out with him. When you're at a high A club, you get to know these guys, in a way I think that is pretty special, especially if you're a fan of the team. That being said, I just, and I know I'm going to sound like Tito here when I say stuff like this. It's hard, especially the Jan Gomes thing. And I'm going to write a piece on this in a little bit, because I think dumping money is a good reason when you have a Roberto Perez to move a guy, especially who might still have peak value, like Jan Gomes. But I still think that the reality of pitcher-catcher relationship is there. I think over the years of being a fan of the sport, you see, in my opinion, the best coaches in baseball always tend to be former pitchers or former catchers, and because of relationships that they build. I'm really concerned about the Jan Gomes move, very simply because I think that he has a fantastic relationship with all the starters. Now, I do think Roberto Perez has a very similar, if not the same, relationship in many ways that Jan Gomes is. So perhaps I'm talking myself out of this. But I do think that there is some value there. I am less concerned about Kipnis in the clubhouse as opposed to a guy like Jan Gomes. I'm just worried about looking at this as a domino effect of losing 5 or 6 main cogs all in one season, including coaching staff. There always seems to be a seismic shift. You are right, though. The young guys that are coming up do have some play there as well, and perhaps it does free up the locker room in a lot of ways with some of these new ideas. I don't know. But can you tell me one thing? And I know I rambled on about this last week, but how is Carlos Santana not considered one of the clubhouse mainstays of this team? Why is that not talked? In every piece I see, even the ones that love Carlos Santana, nobody ever talks about the presence that he has on this team. I mean, you've got him like hugging Josh Tomlin on top of a turtle. What the hell was that? I know it sounds silly, but when you hear all of this stuff about Kipnis being a clubhouse leader or Brantley being a clubhouse leader, how are they rated ahead of Carlos Santana, who clearly has personality, who clearly has gone out of his way over the past 5 or 6 years to kind of have this sort of outward personality in a similar vein to maybe going back to like Manny Ramirez and kind of his accidental personality in the 90s. It seems like Santana is a little more force of nature in that regard. I mean, I know clubhouse is not a measured thing, but why isn't that talked about more? Because to me, it seems like Santana, of anybody, is a major cog in that Indians clubhouse.
I think a lot of it has to do with the narratives around Santana among fans. Even remember the lazy narrative, how much bullcrap that was.
Well, that was a Francona narrative. Let's get that right out of the way.
Exactly. The lazy narrative. The guy who played 5 different positions for you and was a Gold Glove caliber first baseman. And you also get to Carlos Santana didn't really carry the same weight among fans, I don't think, as like a Jason Kipnis did a few years ago. I don't know if it's
if I had Michael Hattery on this, I can tell you what he would say, but I'm not going to go there right now.
we don't need to go there.
Yeah.
We don't need to get that controversial. But
oh man.
I honestly think Kipnis attracted fans because of he's got a little bit of like a chip on his shoulder. He's got a little bit of the way he plays the game, the dirtbag moniker, and
modern day Pete Rose.
Yeah.
Not the betting guy, although that's a whole nother thing. But man, I know too much. I know too much. I got too much going on in my head. But very similar to the way Pete Rose played on the field, for sure.
And with Santana, I think it gets back to like a batting average thing, and his value goes beyond the traditional batting average. So I can't really answer that. It's something I've struggled with, and I'm going to struggle with when I see him in a different uniform next year.
Oh, we can't end on that note, man. What'd you have to say that for? Now I'm going to have to ramble on about, so I can't end there. Oh gosh, we're going to end there, aren't we? We're not. Okay, here's how we're going to end. We'll be back soon. We still need to talk about contract extensions, and we'll do it in a, this was very purposeful. I didn't outline this at all. I just kind of wanted to ramble through and talk about all the things that were happening over this past week, especially that fantastic piece that Joe Gerberry wrote, just kind of looking at the realities of some of the questionable moves that have been made, with Francona seemingly at the center of all those moves. I do just want to say, you know, I usually let Gage plug stuff first. I'm just going to go ahead and plug something. Please make sure you check out all of Gage's stuff. He just published something today that maybe got a little less publicity than Joe's because it went on after Joe's stuff, but he took a look at potential relief pitchers that are out there. Please take a look at his stuff. Our Indians coverage is absolutely fantastic. Make sure you're following our baseball stuff over the off season. The big thing for me, though, to plug, and then I'll throw it now that I've stolen. Gage is like, damn, now what am I going to say when he comes to me? I'm going to buy you some time, so think. Please make sure that you check out YouTube, our YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com and you're all one word into the search bar, hit return. Check out our YouTube channel, subscribe. We have over 150 subscribers right now. Our goal right now is simply 200. Love to get it into the thousands over the next year. We're updating it very consistently, not only with these podcasts, but with some quick hit things. Gage has been part of that. I've been part of that. Jeff Namna is sort of running the show there. Please make sure you check that stuff out. And, of course, check out Mike Hattery stuff, Mike Bodie stuff. And, man, our football coverage is absolutely positively phenomenal. You got to check out Jake Burns and the whole slew of guys writing football, including Gerberry as well. I think WFN right now is killing it. We're stepping up our Cavs stuff too. I'm even going to write some Cavs stuff, so look out. That's right. I'm going to write again. That's the rumor. I've written a little bit.
That was a rumor a week ago.
Yeah, it's kind of gone now. But I said I was going to write a piece, and then Hattery's got me writing dumb got to keep it kid-friendly stuff. So I'll leave it there. So I'm going to throw it to you, Gage. Anything you want to plug after I basically just plug the entire site?
I think you pretty much covered it. I did take a look at a couple relief options to kind of placate the losses of Joe Smith and Brian Shaw possible. I still think they retain Smith, but Brian Shaw's as good as gone. And so I took a look at some buy low options. I wasn't looking at the Wade Davises of the world, but more guys who had rough 2017s.
Yeah, well, and go ahead. Dead air. Nice. Are you still there? No. Please make sure you check out our podcast. We, of course, had big numbers last week. We had over I think 1,700 hits last week, which is really good for this podcast. So please make sure you're checking out the WFNY podcast. We have some surprises coming on the horizon there. Not only that, but of course we have Craig Lindell doing his regular thing with Ben Axelrod, and I've got some surprises off my own up my sleeve over the next couple days. It looks like Gage is my main tag team partner as of now. You know what I think, Gage? We got to get Hattery on here with us next time. Seems like let's do that.
Let's start a three-way. Oh, yeah. We're still staying kid-friendly. Sorry.
God. That's how we're ending it. All right, guys. Go Tribe. We'll be more – God, we're bringing Hattery on next time. We're not going to be more positive. That's not going to be positive. It's going to be negative. That's okay. It's the offseason. There's no playing. There's no games. We can be negative. We got to talk about the Arizona Fall League. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm off. All right. See you next time. Peace.